Hello everyone and welcome to today's chat. My name is Trinia and I'm a team member here at Understood. And today we're going to be talking about understanding math issues. We're lucky enough to have Dr. Paul Yellin joining us. Hi Paul, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you, Trinita?
Great. Do you want to take just a minute to introduce yourself to our viewers?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Paul Yellin. I'm the director at the Yellin Center for Mind, Brain, and Education. I'm an associate professor of pediatrics at NYU School of Medicine. The Yellin Center is a center that specializes in doing diagnostic assessments. I guess you call them neuropsychological assessments. We also do professional development for educators and do talks for parents. But I love doing webinars for Understood because of the wonderful work this organization does. So, it's just a pleasure to join all you here today. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for that. So before we get started, I just want to remind our viewers that we will be taking your questions today. So if you have a question for Paul, you can go ahead and type it in the chat box at any time, and we'll get to as many as we can throughout the chat. And even if you don't have a question, feel free to pop in and say hi and talk to each other. Sometimes the best advice can come from other parents and families that are in the same situation. So as we're getting started, I wonder, Paul, can you start us by just talking about the different terms that our parents might hear? Like, what is a learning disability? What is dyscalculia? And are there other terms that they might be hearing from schools or neuropsychologists that they should know?
Well, absolutely. I think that, one of the terms or the idea of a learning disability typically means that your child is having difficulty mastering an important skill in school and that there's something actually getting in the way. And we, don't have a lot of trouble. I think people are very comfortable with the term dyslexia and understanding that means you can be perfectly bright and intelligent and are having trouble learning to read. Well, dyscalculia is a similar kind of problem, but it relates to learning math. And there are a number of different facets to it. And because math is such a complex thing, and in fact, a lot of the research about math and math disabilities is relatively new, but when we're looking at children who are struggling, looking at things like having difficulty with the number sense, understanding how numbers work, how quantities work, having difficulty sort of learning your basic number facts, your times tables, having difficulty remembering or understanding math procedures or algorithms, and having difficulty sort of solving math word problems or understanding how to work with numbers and understanding how those kind of quantities work. And so it falls into those areas. What we'll often see is parents will talk to us and they'll say that they're almost having here today, gone tomorrow phenomena that can be really frustrating. My child learned their times tables. We drilled it all weekend, and Monday in the car on the way to school, we drilled them again. It was as if it wasn't there. She knew it when she was preparing for the test, and suddenly she couldn't solve the problem. And it can feel like, wow, they knew it, but that there really is something getting in the way of these concepts, these processes sticking. And so it's very frustrating. And it doesn't mean your child's lazy. It doesn't mean your child's not intelligent. It doesn't mean that they're not trying hard enough, but that this thing is real. It is that they seem to have it, and then it slips away, and it's just not sticking.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. And you kind of already led us into where I was going to head, which is the signs that parents might be seeing. And so if parents are seeing some of these signs where their kids are struggling a lot in math, having trouble remembering their times tables, or just the concept of numbers in general, what should they do next? How do they find out if their child actually has a disability or is just struggling with one area of math and will eventually get better at that thing?
Sure. I think that, and I would even, start early on, I think sort of drawing the analogy to dyslexia and reading problems, we're knowing that people who are struggling to read are having trouble learning the connection between sounds and letters. What we're learning about children who are struggling with dyscalculia is in a similar way to having difficulty making the connections between the numerals, the number, the digit 1, and the quantity 1 thing. And so, what you're seeing in your children isn't just that they're struggling with mathematics, but you might be seeing, first of all, before you even do an assessment, looking to see, are they having trouble understanding, when they're little kids, are they having trouble counting with what we call one-to-one correspondence? Are they sort of kind of look at 5 things and know that this is 1, this is 2, this is 3? How are they sort of combining sets of information, 5 apples and 3 apples? Are they having trouble making change when you go to the store? Are they having trouble with sequences, remembering even the days of the week or the months of the year? So you're starting to get some signs of those things. And if you're concerned and you're thinking that there might be a learning problem, there are some screeners actually online. There's an organization called the Numeric Cognition Laboratory, researchers in Toronto, that are actually looking at some early screeners for early signs of math disabilities. But if you really suspect that there's a problem, the only way to really diagnose it is to have a comprehensive assessment. And a good place to start is in school, and raise the issue with your child's teacher, and then go to your guidance counselor if you're really concerned. And the kind of assessments that they need to be doing are, typically the assessments that we're doing in the traditional achievement testing is looking at how children are able to do calculations with, are they able to do long division? Are they able to add and subtract with carrying and borrowing? How are they? There are tests that are called fluency tests. So how are children able to do those rapid fire? We used to call them in class the man-mid, where your rapid fire 2-digit calculations. Are they automatic? And are they able to solve math word problems? So through a formal assessment such as that, a psychologist, a developmental pediatrician, or whoever is doing the assessment will be able to help you decide whether or not we're looking at a true math disability.
Absolutely. So if you are a parent out there who's concerned that your child does have dyscalculia or a math disability, requesting an evaluation at school is the best way to start that process of getting supports in place at school for your child. And we have all kinds of resources on Understood for you to find out who to contact if you want a sample letter for how to do this. All of that is on Understood, that you can do a search for that on our website. I do want to get to some of the parent questions, and we actually had a question come in about number sense, which you were talking about is one of the ways that children might exhibit that they are struggling in this area or maybe have a math disability. So Kate is asking, my son is almost 10 and in 5th grade. He seems very good at some aspects of math, but has a real problem with number sense. He cannot add to 10 without his fingers and doesn't understand concepts like adding 3 plus 4 is similar to adding 23 plus 4. Do you have any suggestions for improving his number sense?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I would say is that does sound like, that is what we see with children that are struggling with dyscalculia. Is this, and it may be hard for us to if you're not having the difficulty, it may feel like a blind spot, but math is really not making sense for that child. So there are definitely things. So I just want to step back and say, number one is I would want to make sure that we're looking at those difficulties and that he's getting the right supports in school, because that can cause a lot of frustration. But there are online tools that and I have no commercial interest, but there are tools. There's something called Dreambox, which is another website that's called IXL. But there are sort of web-based exercises where children are almost playing video games and are working on building their number sense. But things that you can do around the house to build number sense is also helpful. Things like recipes, making recipes together. I always, think about having a child even plan a family outing and decide how much time things take to happen, and sort of begin to create a sort of time plan, or plan to go shopping together, and make a shopping list and begin to do, talk a little bit about how much things cost. But if somebody is really still, not automatic, toward the upper elementary school grades with basic addition, I definitely do think an assessment might be worthwhile, and bringing it to his teacher's attention, because what starts to happen, math is very cumulative, and what happens is that you learn one skill and then you need to get to the next skill, and you don't want him to start to feel frustrated because if he has to count on his fingers whenever he adds, it's going to slow him down. So I think there's a lot you can do outside of school, but I want to make sure he's getting the right services in school too.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I like how you mentioned the different activities that parents can do at home to kind of make math more relevant and real and interesting to kids while still trying to build those skills.
And there's a website called Bedtime Math that has lots of little number games that you can play with your child, and even playing games with dice that allow, so working with those exercises at home can really be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. What about, we have a question about word problems, and maybe you can start by talking a little bit about, we know that kids with dyslexia might struggle with word problems, but also kids with dyscalculia might struggle with word problems. How can parents kind of differentiate between that, and how can they just generally help their kids figure out how to solve these word problems?
That's a great great question, and oftentimes we'll see kids who are having reading problems who are doing well in math up until the point where word problems come into play. So and this is nothing I'm about to say. Each kid is different, and so nothing is 100%. But for example, when children are doing really well in math, and suddenly when they encounter word problems, they start to struggle. It makes me think more that the difficulty isn't in the math, but it may be in the reading or in the language. So that when you are looking at word problems, I think that, in medicine, there's a concept called differential diagnosis. If somebody has a cough, you want to figure out, did they swallow a chicken bone? Do they have a pneumonia? You want to think about all the possible causes. So what happens when you just have a math algorithm like long division, and a child can't do that? Well, that they either don't know the procedure or they don't know their number facts. When you throw word problems into the equation, excuse the pun, but throw the word problems into the mix, there's a whole other level of complexity. In other words, is it the math that's hard for them, or is it the language of the word problems? And word problems can be tricky because some children will have difficulty sort of understanding, word problems have something in them that require pattern recognition. That's an important thing for kids to see, that we see for the first time. So, for example, your teacher may be saying in class, she may be teaching you multiplication by describing a car ride. And, a car ride might be a car going 60 miles an hour for 5 hours, and the teacher might say, okay, so how many miles did they go altogether? And your child needs to take that word problem and know, okay, that means 60 times 5 is 300. Now they take an examination, and the question on the test might be, you're selling shirts, and each shirt costs $60, expensive shirts, and you sell 5 of them. How much money do you get? And so for some children, they don't understand that that's the same problem. They're saying, well, we learned multiplication with cars, and now we're talking about shirts. So for some children, the word problems are confusing to them because they're having trouble understanding what's the most important part of information, or what are the key words in the word problem that tell me what algorithm or what operation to do. A key question I ask with word problems that you always want to ask is it that your child doesn't know what to do, or doesn't know how to do it. In other words, if there's a math word problem that requires multiplication, are they stuck because they don't know that they're supposed to multiply, or they don't know how to multiply? And that helps you begin to sort out where the word problem difficulties might be as a start.
I think that's so important to ask that question to figure out if is the child not able to read the word problem and figure out what they're supposed to do, or is it that they understand what they're supposed to do but they have no idea how to do it? And that can definitely drill down like what the issue is.
Yeah, and that is a really good.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think we lost you for a minute there.
Yeah, you hung up on me. I think I said the wrong thing.
Sorry about that.
That's not at all. No, but I think, and one of the things about learning problems that can be overwhelming for parents is that they seem kind of scary. But if you just sort of put on your parent hat and just ask what may seem like obvious questions. For math, it's often a question of, are they having trouble understanding it? Are they having trouble remembering it? And it is interesting when I sit down with children who are struggling with math, and I ask them to describe what they're feeling or what they're seeing. There are a lot of clues there in just listening to what they're having trouble with, and asking your children what they're having trouble with, seeing how they're going about doing math problems. Because children who struggle with attention problems can have a lot of, and we're seeing difficulty with. Are you hearing me okay? Because
it's getting a little bit fuzzy. Keep going, and if it gets too bad, we will check our connection.
Okay. So another area that's tricky with math problems is children have trouble with attention, maybe making minor miscalculations. And those aren't kids with dyscalculia, but they're getting low grades on their math tests. And parents will look at those and describe them. I've heard parents say, my kid is making careless errors. I hate that word because it's not that they're careless, but children that have attention problems, maybe making, or sometimes memory problems, can be making minor miscalculations. So another area is that they might know how to do the math, but suddenly you're taking a look and they're adding when they're supposed to subtract. They're not noticing the signs. Or they know 5 plus 3 is 8. They write down 9. And so I think another important thing to not, and one of my pet peeves with schools is often schools that won't send tests home, won't send exams home. So an important way to get to the bottom of, if you're concerned about your child's math, is that you want to have the math test sent home to you. You want to see where your child's errors are, and we call it error analysis. So if your child is doing poorly on the math test, you want to sit back with the teacher perhaps and look problem by problem and figure out why the child got those problems wrong. Are you hearing me okay? Not so good.
It's still a little fuzzy. I think I'm going to reiterate a little bit what you were saying, but I think it is still coming through. But I liked how you mentioned that especially with students who have ADHD, that there might be errors being made because of attention span, or we had a question come in from a parent about working memory, and similarly with that, needing to write down each step of the problem. And when I was a special ed teacher at the high school level, I definitely noticed this with students that they would think, oh, I don't need to write this down, I'm just going to do it in my head and then move forward. But then somewhere in the middle, they forgot whichever number it was, or when they wrote it down, they didn't line it up correctly. And so like you were saying, Paul, about doing that error analysis or looking at exams or homework to see where your child is making these mistakes can tell you a lot about what the issue is and what needs to be worked on.
Absolutely. Working memory is an important consideration. When we're talking about, I think we're talking about people that are doing research in math talk about two kinds of problems, what they call domain-specific problems. In other words, you're having trouble with math because you're having difficulty with numbers. or you're having difficulty with procedures. And then there are things that are non-domain specific, things that affect lots of learning that are not just related to math. Attention is one, language is another, working memory is a big one. And let me just take a minute to describe what working memory is. Working memory is kind of like our brain's RAM or our desktop. It's where you hold multiple pieces of information at the same time. It's kind of like, let's say you made up your mind that you're going to go to the store and buy a loaf of bread and a container of milk, and now you get into your car and you drive. You don't write down what you're going to buy, but you get to the store. Where was the container of milk and the loaf of bread while you were driving to the store? And the answer is it was sitting in your working memory. And math requires a lot of working memory, especially when you're doing multi-step procedures. And children who struggle with working memory may forget where they are in the middle of a procedure, so they do need to write everything down. And sometimes they may have trouble remembering the steps of the procedure while they're performing it. They may need to have to write the algorithm down first and then apply it. So some clues about kids who have working memory problems might be that they are, this is a child who you send them upstairs with 3 steps of things to do, and they do the first 2 and forget about the third. And that they're having trouble holding multiple steps in their mind. And kids who are struggling with that need to write everything down and need to know that they may be losing track of the steps, and multi-step math can be hard for them.
And do you have any suggestions for how parents can talk to their kids about these issues? Obviously, kids who are struggling in math might be very frustrated or not want to do it at all. And so then trying to tell them, oh, you need to write down every step, and they might not want to do that. So how can parents talk to their kids and encourage them to let them know that the things that they're suggesting are supposed to be helpful and to make math easier?
I think that's a great question. And when we assess a child, one of our favorite terms is what we call demystification. And that means talking to a child about their minds. And so part of having a child try a strategy that you think is going to be helpful, just like anybody, they need to understand why. But what we often find in our work is that we start from the perspective of a child's strengths and even as we're understanding what's hard for a child in math, we can be looking at all the things that are working well and talk about where their strengths are. And then talk about, we might say, you're really good at understanding the complex concepts in math. You have really good hard thinking skills. And you really seem to have the language down. You really understand your word problems. And you actually have a good sense of what procedures to use. So those are all wonderful pieces. You're having some trouble with something that we call working memory. And that means holding all the pieces in our mind together. And we know that when people have trouble with working memory, writing things down can be really helpful. And might even ask them to try an experiment and see what works better for them. But I think that kids are much more receptive to strategies when they, first of all, understand why, but also understand that it's a lot easier to accept what's challenging for you when you're hearing it together with what works well for you. And then sort of the other truism that I know in my own home with my own children is sometimes somebody else telling your child something is way more acceptable to them than you telling them something. And so having somebody, maybe a tutor, a teacher, but their own sort of resource where, and I know it's frustrating. I've worked with children and parents who go, how come you're listening to him when I said the same thing to you yesterday? But it is just that way. Oftentimes, children will take advice from other people, especially adolescents, because it doesn't feel like that person's trying to run their lives. As parents, we may be stepping on our kids' toes. So sometimes getting somebody else to give the suggestion can be really helpful.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We had a couple questions come in about older students who are in middle school or high school and are still struggling with like basic addition and multiplication skills. Can you give some suggestions of just like are these skills that they should continue working on with older students, or is it that they should start using a calculator with these students to try to move beyond? Or what advice do you have for older students?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it still goes to figuring out why. And so we'll see children who are having gaps in basic skills at different points along the way. And so before one, is it that it wasn't taught and they didn't master it? So actually, and I think that we're always looking to say, okay, what can we do to help this child today? So if a child is not able to master those basic calculations, I do think that they should be permitted to use a calculator. But I also think that depending on why they're having that difficulty, there may be still opportunities for them to learn those things. It may be that the approach that would work for them hasn't been tried yet. So I'm always reluctant to say at the outset, give up on building that skill. I think that you can give that child a bypass strategy so that they can get through today's math homework and get through this week's test and still drill down and say, well, why is that hard? And is it possible that a different approach can have traction and the child can learn it? So I think that child deserves to have somebody look at why that's still a problem and help parents decide, do we keep on working on it? Do we not work on it?
Yeah, I think that's great. I know we're running out of time. There are a couple more questions that I want to get to, though. Are there if parents have gone through the evaluation process and their child has an IEP, are there other accommodations or modifications you would recommend be put in place at school?
I think a huge one for math, almost regardless of the reason, is something that I would call front loading or previewing. And it goes something, so the idea is that one of the most common ways that folks deal with kids that are struggling is to give them an opportunity to review what they had trouble with. So they, come after class to ask questions. And of course, what children say to me all the time is, I go to teacher for extra help and they say, well, what didn't you understand? And the kid says, if I knew what I didn't understand, I wouldn't need to ask the question. So I think having kids have to go later for help can really be frustrating. But I think what I would call front loading or previewing, and that means asking that the teacher provide to you and or your tutor what's coming up in math, what's going to be coming up over the next few days, and having your child preview that before they come into class can make a huge difference, because kids who have dyscalculia, what inevitably happens is that they're conditioned to, that they know sooner or later they're going to get lost. And they're going into class worrying about when that's going to happen and worrying about where this is all going to go. And now they come to get extra help because they didn't understand what happened. And they're going through math every day like that, where they're lost. We try to catch up and they're lost. If they can start out knowing what's coming and having an opportunity to preview and front load, now they're going into class and they're less anxious because they kind of know where it's all going. The teacher is reviewing what they've kind of already heard, and so that they're feeling on top of things, and now the class is a review, and it helps reinforce for them. And it breaks that cycle of experience every day of sooner or later I'm going to be lost and I'm going to feel stupid. So I think front loading and putting that into the IEP and insisting on that it's really, I think, can be really helpful. And it's something it's not thought about a lot. I don't see it too much.
I love that idea of giving them the chance to preview material before class. I definitely saw students at the high school where I was working that didn't know what question to ask because they didn't understand the whole lesson. And so figuring out how to ask a question about it can be really hard. But being able to look at the material ahead of time and maybe even sitting down with a parent or a tutor ahead of time to look it over could be helpful so that they know what questions maybe that they're going to have about it.
I want to say, can I say one last word? And that's
sure.
The Khan Academy. The Khan Academy is free, because And don't feel bad, because if your child's having math problems, you may have had them as well, so that we're not putting the burden on parents to say, now you have to teach your child math. But there are online resources, and Khan Academy is one that's free that does have almost YouTube videos of different math lessons. So once you know what's coming up tomorrow, there are resources where your child can preview, and you don't need to be the one to teach to them if you don't have a tutor available to you.
That's so true, and we definitely used Khan Academy when I was a teacher as well, so definitely a lot of useful resources on there as well. And what about, conversely, parents who are having trouble working with the school or talking to the school about their child's issues? Do you have any recommendations of how to talk to the school about math disability or dyscalculia if the school is not as aware of this issue, that math disability might be an issue for this child?
And I think that you're reaching out, sharing resources like Understood can be really helpful, and understanding what your rights are. In other words, I see so many people who they're sort of shut down at the classroom level when they raise the concern, and the teacher says, "Oh, don't worry about it, it's okay." I've had teachers, parents come to me and say, "My teacher actually said not everybody needs to be an A student." So I think understanding that you are entitled to have your child assessed. If you're concerned about a problem, that the school has that obligation, and raising the concern to the right level in the school can be really important. So if you're concerned, bring it to the principal. Don't get shut down at the classroom level. There are outside resources. Sometimes you need to get an independent evaluation or reach out to an organization like Understood. There's an organization called COPA, C-O-P-A-A, a coalition, I think, of parents, advocates, and attorneys, where there are resources in each community, of even free resources of people you can go to understand what your rights are and what you're entitled to. And you're always entitled to get an independent evaluation. Sometimes you can get the district to pay for it, not always. I think just know that you're not out there alone with these concerns.
Yeah, that's great advice. And we do have resources on Understood that you can find out what your rights are as a parent. But generally, if you're concerned about a disability, you want to put this in writing and request an evaluation from the school and have that written documentation that you've done that. And the school does have to respond to your request and let you know what steps they're going to take next. So you can look for that on Understood. But also, unfortunately, we don't have time to get to all of the questions that people had today. But if you still have a question that you want to ask, you can join our community. And there's lots of parents and families that are in our community conversing with each other, offering tips and advice. And sometimes our experts also pop in and answer questions. So check that out. It's at u.org/community. We also have lots of archived video chats that you can look at. This one is going to be archived later on today, that you can rewatch it if you missed part of it, or you can go back and look for old chats, and you can find that at u.org/calendar. We also are trying to get feedback about our chats that we're hosting, and so we're going to pop a link in the chat box for a survey that we hope all of you will fill out and let us know what your experience has been, what types of topics you're interested in seeing, and just your general feedback. And I think that's all of the things that I needed to get through. Thank you so much for joining us today, Paul.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Great. And everyone, have a great day. Thanks for joining us.